reset here and open it up for questions.
What were some of your main takeaways?
5:47 in the morning, and a Nizzy Clark's alarm cut cleanly through the darkness of a quiet Iowa bedroom. Her hand reaching out by instinct to silence it before the second beep could wake anyone else, because some habits are born from love and others from secrecy. And for 12 years hers had been shaped by both. The dim glow of her phone lighting up the familiar contact photo of her daughter smiling back at her, a picture taken years earlier when life still felt uncomplicated, before medical. Reports and whispered phone calls had settled into the hidden corners of her heart, before she learned how heavy silence can become when it is carried for someone you love more than yourself. Because what and was finally ready to reveal after more than a decade would explain a mystery that basketball analysts, sports journalists, and even Caitlin herself had never fully understood: how a player could develop such impossibly precise hand-eye coordination, the kind that made long-range shots look effortless and no-look passes feel like instinct rather than calculation, the kind that made defenders seem permanently half a second too late. And the truth was that the answer did not begin in a packed arena or a high school gym, but in misty mornings and deliberate routines built around a secret Caitlin never knew existed. The medical report had arrived when Caitlin was 11 and sat on the kitchen counter like an uninvited guest, and remembering even now the exact weight of that paper in her hands, the way her fingers trembled as Dr. Morrison's voice echoed in her mind. Significant developmental concerns with hand-eye coordination, tracking delays, spatial awareness issues, language that sounded clinical but landed like a threat to a dream. Because for a child who lived and breathed basketball, this was not abstract theory but a possible ending. And Anne had stood at the kitchen window that afternoon watching her daughter outside, the steady rhythm of the ball against concrete Reese, and falling like a heartbeat, each dribble representing hours of practice and years of hope. And she had asked herself the question every parent dreads: how do you tell your child that her body might not cooperate with her ambition? Coaches had begun to notice passes that should connect drifting just wide, shots that looked perfect somehow missing by inches, and Caitlin's frustration showed in the way she stayed outside long after dark, shooting until her arms ached as if determination alone could correct something she did not know was there. And it was then and made a decision that would quietly shape the next 12 years of both their lives, because during that appointment Dr. Morrison had mentioned something almost casually. Golf, he had said, the repetitive motion, the focus on a small target, the demand for tracking and fine motor control, it rewires neural pathways. But Anne knew the obstacle immediately. Caitlin hated golf, had tried it once at a family gathering and declared it boring and slow. And if and suggested it as therapy, her daughter would feel broken, different, defined by a problem she was too young to carry. So the solution arrived at 3 in the morning, the hour when anxious minds refused rest, and Anne decided she would not tell Caitlin about the diagnosis at all. She would make golf something else entirely. At 5:30 the next morning, she knocked gently on her daughter's door, smiling through the weight of the secret she was about to build, explaining that they never spent time alone anymore, that basketball and work filled every day, that she had found a beautiful golf course that opened early where they could watch the sunrise and talk. And Caitlin agreed, not because she wanted to play golf, but because something in her mother's voice made refusal impossible. Unaware that Anne had already spoken in hushed tones to Coach Margaret at Wakanda Club, explaining everything, unaware that every casual session was a carefully designed therapeutic progress, disguised as family time, unaware that her mother woke an hour earlier than necessary every single morning to coordinate progress notes and adjust plans. Those early mornings were harder than Anne had expected, Caitlin yawning through swings, complaining about sleep, questioning why breakfast at home was not enough, and in deflecting with stories and jokes, promising they could stop whenever she wanted, while Coach Margaret, a woman in her late 60s with hands weathered by decades of precision, became the third keeper of the secret, understanding exactly what Anne was trying to do and reminding her that the key was success, small victories. Every session, progress without pressure. Week after week the pattern continued, and waking at 4:45, reviewing notes, preparing breakfast, gently waking her daughter, the 15-minute drive just long enough for conversations about school, basketball, friendships, and fears to unfold naturally. And then the work began, Margaret focusing on tracking the ball from impact to landing, maintaining visual focus, adjusting grip pressure, building neural connections shot by shot, until something subtle began to change. Caitlin's frustration easing, her confidence growing, golf becoming not therapy but habit. not obligation but routine, and in carrying the secret quietly as years passed and basketball transformed. Shots tightening, passes threading impossible gaps. Analysts calling it instinct and genius, never knowing it was built in silence, sacrifice and love, and now, standing in that quiet kitchen years later with the dawn beginning to break, and knew the secret was no longer hers alone. Because sometimes the greatest gifts parents give are the ones their children never realize they received. Shaped
reason that they didn't get into?
No, never any reasons. It's not personal. It's the flow of a game, right? There's 200 minutes to spread around. It's tough to...
Coordinating complex hand movements with body rotation and developing spatial awareness through careful distance estimation were the real objectives behind every lesson. Yet all of it was presented to Caitlin as nothing more than simple golf instruction, and she never suspected that each drill, each repeated swing, each seemingly casual remark from Coach Margaret was deliberately designed to stimulate and strengthen specific neural pathways that had once been flagged as vulnerable pathways. That needed patience rather than pressure, time rather than fear, and above all dignity rather than labels, because the change did not arrive dramatically or all at once. And for the first 6 months, progress was so subtle it was almost invisible, leaving and lying awake at night wondering whether she had chosen the right path or merely delayed an inevitable disappointment. But then the smallest shifts began to appear, almost shy in their arrival, Caitlin's basketball coaches mentioning in passing that her passes seemed sharper, more accurate, and noticing her daughter tracking moving objects with greater ease, catching things she dropped with reflexes that felt newly alert, and Caitlin herself complaining less about the early mornings, even referring to golf occasionally as something she and her mom did together. Not therapy, not work, just theirs. And by the end of the first year, the improvement was undeniable. Caitlin's hand-eye coordination advancing at a pace that astonished even Dr. Morrison. While something unexpected unfolded alongside it, she was genuinely becoming good at golf. What had begun as treatment quietly transformed into skill. And during those whispered dawn conversations, Coach Margaret would smile and tell, and that Caitlin possessed a natural aptitude that had been locked away only because the underlying coordination issues needed time to resolve. As the years passed, the secret grew heavier, because when Caitlin turned 13 and began dominating youth basketball leagues, when her three-point shooting became almost mythical, coaches started asking and about training regimens and routines, and in Learn to Smile, to speak of discipline and practice, never revealing the truth. And when Caitlin was 15 and a sports analyst profiled her uncanny court awareness and watched with her heart pounding, terrified that someone would trace the line back to those mornings, while Caitlin herself occasionally wondered aloud why they still kept up. The tradition, liking the quiet time but questioning the golf, and it always had an answer ready. It was their ritual, their space, and Caitlin, who did treasure those moments of stillness with her mother, would let the question dissolve. Coach Margaret became family in all but name, attending basketball games, cheering louder than anyone when Caitlin hit a game-winning shot, hugging and afterwards with tears because they both understood what no one else could see, that every precise pass, every impossible three-pointer, every moment of spatial awareness that set Caitlin apart had roots sunk deep into those misty Iowa mornings. And what no one knew was that, and kept the full medical record locked away in a bedroom drawer. Every report documenting progress. Every note linking golf drills to neural development. Clinical language quietly recording a healing journey that had always felt like love instead of treatment. When Caitlin was drafted into the WNBA and became a phenomenon, the secret pressed harder than ever, especially during interviews where Caitlin credited work ethic and countless hours of practice. And sitting nearby knowing an essential truth remained untold. Yet she stayed silent because she believed some gifts were not meant to be acknowledged. The revelation arrived on a morning eerily similar to those old 5:30 wake-up calls. Caitlin home briefly during a break in her WNBA season, sorting through boxes in the garage when she found a manila envelope marked Priva. Her mother's handwriting, and inside were medical documents, coaching notes, therapy progress reports, all centered on golf and neural development. All dated to when she was 11, and Caitlin sat on the garage floor as the pieces assembled themselves into a picture she had never known existed. The dates aligning perfectly with the start of their morning sessions, the terminology describing challenges she had never been told she faced. Coach Margaret's notes speaking of patience and treatment, rather than students and lessons, and when and came home she found her daughter still there, tears falling freely as she held the initial diagnosis suggesting basketball might never be possible. Caitlin's voice broke as she asked how she had never been told, how every morning had been framed as togetherness rather than healing, and then sat beside her, 12 years of silence finally unfolding, explaining that she could not bring herself to tell an 11-year-old with enormous dreams that her body might not cooperate, that she had needed to heal smarter, not practice harder. So she and Coach Margaret had hidden therapy inside family time, rewiring her brain without ever letting her feel broken, and the embrace that followed held 12 years of sacrifice, hundreds of alarms, secret phone calls, carefully planned mornings, and a love that had worked entirely in shadow. That same week, Caitlin insisted on seeing Coach Margaret, now 81 and living quietly in assisted accommodation, and the recognition